First off, I want to thank the grace of heaven and the virtues of the masters, the mercy of the grand predecessors, transmitting masters, and everyone here today for the opportunity to talk about Buddha, the Buddha. Okay, so because Sunday, let's see, the 8th, yeah, the 8th is it's the day that's celebrated Buddha's birthday. Okay, but all right, let's see. So now the topic that okay, so this is kind of talking a little bit about his life, but it's not going to go into too much detail as far as like his teachings, because we have other topics that talk about that, right? So okay, all right. So he was born as Siddhartha Gautama. Okay, that's his name, so he was born roughly. It's generally accepted to be around 563 BCE. And although the specific date is not really, it's on the Chinese lunar calendar, on the lunar calendar, it's the 4th month and the 8th day. Okay, so that's this coming Sunday. But his actual birth date may not be that day. See, this day, people kind of celebrate his birthday on this day. It's not just celebrating his birthday, actually, is because when he attained enlightenment, and also when he attained parinirvana, when he left this world, it was all in that month, all right, in the month, that 4th month, the lunar month. And so you can say that this is kind of like a date that kind of celebrates all 3 things, okay, events of the Buddha. Okay, so, but it may not be the exact date, right? Okay, so he was born in this place called Lumbini, which is in the Sakya Republic, which is current day Nepal. So that's just at the foothills of the Himalayas, I guess. The Sakya Republic. So Buddha is also known as Sakyamuni Buddha, right? So because he's part of this in the Sakya clan, and so that's also that's another name that we know him by. Sakyamuni means, I think, sage of the Sakyas. Okay, so but you also hear like Gautama Buddha. People refer to as Gautama Buddha. Siddhartha is kind of his given name. So, but once you become a Buddha, it's he's either called Gautama Buddha or Sakyamuni Buddha. His parents, his father was King Suddhodana, and his mother was Queen Maya Devi. Okay, so actually, there's question about whether this is. If it's a republic, then he may not really be a king, but he's a ruler, or he could be like a chief, elder there, or something like that. Now, thing is, when his mother, all right, Maya Devi, gave birth to, there is a story there, but she died like a week after giving birth to Siddhartha, right? Now the king, back then it was common for the kings to have multiple wives, right? So he also had basically, besides Queen Maya Devi, but also her sister. So that would be Siddhartha's maternal aunt. I don't know if stepmother, but anyways, yeah, you can say stepmother as well. Mahapajapati Gotami. Okay, so that was the sister of Maya Devi. So basically, the king married both of them, and so basically, when his birth mother died, then Mahapajapati kind of took over and raised him. So basically, Siddhartha really didn't know his birth mother because he was only like a week old. But he was raised by Mahapajapati. Okay, so now he also had siblings, well, from Mahapajapati's side. So Sundari and Nanda. I mean, they were so they would be considered as half sister and half brother. Right. Now, all right. So something about just an aside about Mahapajapati Gautami is the mother, maternal mother, the aunt who kind of raised him. Right. So she became the first woman to be accepted into the Sangha as a bhikkhuni, which is basically a Buddhist nun. Right. So, and the story goes that actually, she tried after basically the death of the king. Okay. Then she went to see the Buddha to ask to be accepted into the order of monks, the Sangha. Okay. So, but initially Buddha refused and went to this other city. But she was not deterred. She followed him. And this time, I think it was Ananda who kind of asked, Buddha, say, well, are women, are they also capable of becoming enlightened? And Buddha says yes. And then so why can't women join the order? And so Buddha relented and finally let women join, and so she was the first one. And after that, there were many others who also joined as nuns, right? Okay, so now, so later on, let's see, Siddhartha, right, he grew up. Now, he seemed to not take too much of an interest in a lot of things. So when the kids are playing outside, he would kind of be off on his own in the garden, and and the king, wanted him to be happy. Of course, he was wondering that maybe he might not be happy. Well, okay. Well, first of all, I'll get to the other story about why, but anyways, so his future wife. Okay, so Yahodara. Actually, I think it's Yashodhara. But anyways, spell that. Okay. Had a brother actually, Devadatta. So Devadatta is actually, you see, they actually, Siddhartha is a cousin of, I don't know, they might be a little bit second, third, whatever, removed cousin of Yashodhara and Devadatta, right, her brother. So actually, one day, when the kids were playing outside and Siddhartha was in the garden by himself, right, there was a flock of swans flying overhead, right? Suddenly, an arrow struck one of them, right, and fell to the ground near the prince, right? Siddhartha, he's the prince. Right? He felt pity for the bird. Right? He picked it up and tried to comfort the swan while removing the arrow from its wing. Right? Soon after, Devadatta came running with his bow and arrows and looking for the swan that he shot down, right? So he demanded that Siddhartha give him the swan, but Siddhartha refused. After arguing for a while, Siddhartha suggested that they present their case to the court and have the elders decide who should get the swan. Man, this is kind of like how the adults kind of settle arguments in the same way. Right? So after they each told the court what happened, right, the elders would kind of split on who should get the swan, right? Some said that, well, because the Devadatta, he shot the bird, it belonged to him. Others said that because Siddhartha found the bird, why it belongs to him, okay? And you can say, yeah, they both have their arguments, their points. Then another elder came and they recounted their stories to him. And he said that everyone values their own life more than anything else in the world. Therefore, the swan should belong to the person who tried to save its life, right? Because the swan would also obviously value its own life. So not the person who tried to take its life away. So give the swan to Siddhartha. And all the elders agreed that this was very wise and decided to let Siddhartha keep the swan. So that's just one of the stories there involving Devadatta. Actually, Devadatta, he would later become a disciple of Buddha, but later on, due to whatever jealousy or whatever, he became a rival, and also even tried to kill, bring harm to the Buddha. Okay, so, but it seems like their rivalry kind of started when they were young, okay, as children. Now, okay, he also, Siddhartha had a son named Rahula, and he had the son not too long before he actually decided to leave the palace and seek the truth. Okay, right. We'll get to that. And so basically, he left the palace when he was about around 29 years old. And actually, it had been, so throughout his through his childhood, he was always very compassionate, kind, merciful, like to animals and things like that. I mean, he was very, he wouldn't harm them. And so, it's kind of, and he also saw how nature was. He saw that, wow, there's, everything's, living beings, they want to be happy. But there's still all that suffering, or maybe in the pursuit of happiness, there's still creating suffering. It's like he sees in nature. It's like these animals, they prey on each other. They eat, they eat one another, right? So they kill one another. And so all these things built up, and plus, okay, there's some other things that foresights, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so in the end, right? So he left, and roughly when he was roughly 35 years old. Okay, so 29 to 35, so that was 6 years. He did some practices, trying to find that truth, trying to answer his question about life, about suffering. And finally, he achieved it by himself, okay, in around 528 BC, right? And then he taught for, I don't know, I guess this would be about 46 years, 45, 46 years. I guess some people say it's like 49, something like that, but anyways, and, he finally, he was like 80 years old, and he achieved parinirvana. Now, parinirvana means that he left basically the restraints of this world, and he was not, he transcended the cycle of death and rebirth. Okay, so that happened in 483 BC. Okay, in Kushinagar. Okay, and that's I guess in current day India or northern India. It's all near Nepal there. All right, so talking about the birth. So according to the legend, I guess, Queen Maya Devi had a dream in which an elephant, perhaps it was a white elephant, bearing a white lotus, entered into her womb. And soon after, she was pregnant. Okay. And now, so remember, now apparently, I guess the tradition was for the queen, I mean, if she was, or whoever, like she was pregnant, then that she would go to her own family's, her parents' home to raise or to give birth. Okay, so along the way, they were in the forest, and she felt that it was time to give birth, and the legend has it that she's grabbing her right or left arm is holding onto this tree branch, and she gave birth. Okay, but there's also something else that said that, according to legend, Siddhartha, when he was born, he took 7 steps and said he is the greatest, between heaven and earth. Okay, but it seems unlikely that I don't know. I don't know if that's that seems just people saying that. I don't know. But okay, so Queen Maya died, a few days after, about a week after the son was born, and then Gautama was raised by his maternal aunt, right? Mahapadi Gautami. Okay. So when he was born, after he was born, obviously the king was very happy that he had a son, because then, his son could take over the kingdom once, after when the king, was no longer there. So the king asked for predictions. I guess this is what they typically do, about the future of his son, right? And basically, there were 8 Brahmins. Brahmins are like the Hindu priests, because remember back that time there was no Buddhism, right? It hadn't started yet, but it was they were like Hindus. Okay, so the Hindu religion and practice. So these Brahmins, they were like the Hindu priests, and they can kind of see fortune, kind of like fortune telling, right? So they made predictions. Now they all predicted that you would be a great, the son Siddhartha would be a great man. Okay, now either he would become the great king, and take over the kingdom, or he would become a spiritual leader, a holy man, right? So there were these. It could go either way. Now there was one of the Brahmins. He Kandinya is his name, but he was the youngest of those Brahmins. He was the one who definitely, he said definitively, without a doubt, that he predicted that Siddhartha would actually become a spiritual leader, a holy man. Okay, so, and it turns out, of course, he was right. But all right, so, but the king, when he heard this, he said, "Wow, that's great, it'd be great," but he really didn't want his son to become a spiritual leader and not, take the throne in the future. So basically, he made sure that his son only knew the pleasure of his life in the palace. Okay. Okay. So this is where we get to this thing. Now, according to legend, right? So so this is probably when he's in his teens. Okay, Siddhartha, he ventured out of the palace grounds and he encountered 4 sights that would change him forever. Right? Basically, now some stories say that this on each day he saw one of these things. Okay, so on the first day he went out. Now the king would actually, prepare actually because basically you go to the city, visit the city, right? Because you want to see how life is outside. And so the king would prepare the city, tell the people in the city to, just have all everyone be prepared. So, and hide all the things and the people who, this shows things that are not very good. Okay, so, and so they did that. But when he went out on the first time, supposedly he then saw among the crowd of cheering, young, happy people. He saw among the crowd there was one person who looked different. He was like white hair. He was hunched over. He looked wrinkly skin, and he asked his chariot driver, Chana, say, "Oh, that man over there, why does he look like that?" And so Chana explained to him, "Well, that's the old age, okay, that everyone becomes old, and over the years, and so then Siddhartha said, was wondering, wow, that means I'm going to become old too." And so yeah, so he wasn't too happy when he saw that, and so he turned back. Okay, so anyway, this is one of the stories of how one of the stories says. But and then the next time he went out, he saw this. Even though, despite the preparations, right, that the king made to try to prevent him from seeing anything that would be show any kind of suffering or anything like that, he saw a person who was sick. And again, he asked his chariot driver, Chana, says, "Hey, this person, what's wrong with this person?" And Chana says to him, "Well, this person is sick. Everyone gets sick in their lives, and there's sometimes they're sick, and you can't really do anything about it." And so he saw the suffering, and he wasn't happy. And they headed back to the palace. Then the next time went out, and he saw someone who had passed away. Okay, there was like a funeral procession, and again he asked his chariot driver, China, "Well, what happened to this person, this man? How come he's lying in that box, the casket?" Or the coffin. And China explained to him, "Well, this is the eventual, everyone dies in the end." And so, including, well, I mean, that's everyone. So Siddhartha himself would also die one day. So hearing this, he was definitely not happy about it. And so he headed back. Basically, he's wondering about why. I mean, he's been living a life of luxury, indulgence. Just everything is just almost perfect, like in heaven. But and yet, when he saw this, he was like wondering, wow. I mean, if this is going to happen to me one day, I mean, I'm definitely going to get old. I may get sick. I'm going to die. Then all that I'm living for right now, this indulgence, this pleasure, it's all going to go away. Right? It's all going to end, not just for me, but for everyone. And so, how can people take pleasure in life when that's going to, the end result is death, right? Then another time he then saw this ascetic, or this, basically this person who's kind of renounced the material world, and he's seeking, also you can say seeking the truth, or seeking an end to suffering, and he was inspired by that. Said, "Hey, I can do the same. Why don't I do that, right? Why don't I seek the truth, find the answer to this question that I have, is that why do we have to suffer?" Okay, and so this, you can say this kind of happened, his, you can say these revelations kind of happened before his son was born, okay? And so it was maybe not too long before. And, when his son is born, then he named his son Rahula, right? So Rahula means fetter, okay? Fetter meaning like a shackle, being chained, restraint, bond, right? So he knew that despite the fact that, yes, he loves his wife, he loves his child, but he knew that all this, you can say this human sentiment, right, becomes a chain and will prevent him from getting the truth, okay, getting to the truth, or escaping from transcending the suffering. Okay, so after seeing these sights, Siddhartha, he was thinking about the existential problem of this. This is basically the human condition, or actually this is the condition of all sentient beings, okay, animals included, right? So, he realized that the decadent palace life that he lived was meaningless, really. because in the end, it's he can't. I mean, it all disappears, right? It goes away. That he will lose everything and that he loved and possessed in life. So that ascetic, right, inspired him to seek the true meaning of life and the end to suffering, right, to seek the ultimate truth and understanding of one's true nature. Okay. So, you know, he did not believe that, well, this is just the way it is and we have to accept it. I mean, it's, yeah. I mean, I guess in a way that's kind of true. That, I mean, obviously these are facts that this will happen to every living being, every sentient being. But he was not satisfied with that, with accepting that. I mean, he was thinking there must be something else. This cannot just be like this. I mean, life, I mean, there must be a way out. There must be a way to end this, okay? And because of his persistence, his determination, his will to seek that answer, seek the truth, you know, that's why today we have, well, that's why Buddhism is, you know, so widespread today. And, you know, he is so well known and revered. Okay. So he left his wife and child and renounced his inheritance to the throne, right? You know, he didn't even, you know, in the middle of the night, he kind of took a look, one last look, and he kind of slipped away from the palace, right? Okay, so now supposedly now Rahula, okay, so his son later on he did come back. So he left his family, left everything, but he did come back to visit once. That was probably around 9 years later. I don't know, some people say 7, but Rahula then by that time was, you know, again, he was around 7 or 9 years old. And, you know, his mother, right, you know, told Rahula to ask his father, right, who's now at that time the Buddha, says to ask him for his inheritance, right, so that Rahula can become the king, right? Because obviously the Buddha, he basically abdicated, you know, the throne. Okay, he didn't want to become the king anymore. So then it would go to Rahula, and Rahula asked, and then asked for his inheritance. Buddha instead gave him, basically inducted him into the order of the monks. So, you know, as one of his disciples. So in fact, yeah. So I mean, so actually, Rahula did become Buddha's disciple, right? And in fact, and also his wife Yasodhara also became a nun later on as well. Okay. Now, okay, so after he renounced, basically renounced the world, and he went to seek the truth. It started on, this journey. Now, there were five of those Brahmins, right? Who there were 8 who was predicting the future of Siddhartha, and 5 of them kind of followed when they found out that Siddhartha left to seek the truth. They followed him to also. Basically, well, you know, somebody will say that the king sent them to kind of watch over Siddhartha, but in any case, they went and, you know, to find him, and to then they also ended up, you know, practicing with him. Okay. Initially, Buddha sought two masters. Basically, there was a guru named Alara Kalama. Okay, who taught him about, you know, his meditation, and also there was and the second one was Udaka Ramaputta. Okay, so these are the gurus who were teaching him meditations. Okay, so but you know, he was a quick learner, and he mastered everything that they could teach him in a short time. And then he asked if they could, you know, with their practice, can they end the suffering? And they said they couldn't. So, Siddhartha, he was not satisfied and decided to set off on his own to find the answer, right? And so those 5 companions, the ascetic companions also went with him. So then they tried the ascetic practices, right? These are the very austere, sleeping on a bed of nails, hanging from a tree, sleeping or whatever, all sorts of very tough, practice, not, let's see, also like, enduring lots of pain, things like that, okay? The idea was to find release from suffering by enduring pain and also fasting, right? But Siddhartha was taking it to the extreme. So this, but basically these ascetic practices happened for most of that 6 years, okay? In the end, he was not even sleeping and he was eating just, like some people say a sesame, or, maybe it's just a few grains of rice a day or something like that, right? And his ascetic companions were amazed by his determination and thought that if anyone is going to succeed in this practice, it would be Siddhartha, right? Because he had such great determination, right? But his practice was, too extreme. I mean, he took it too far. He became so weak and emaciated, it was almost like a living skeleton, right? As a result, he one day he's meditating in a tree and he fainted. He almost died, I guess. Then, the story goes, there was a shepherd girl who offered him some milk or rice milk or something like that, kind of revived him. And then after drinking that, and he realized that he must not starve to death before attaining enlightenment. So obviously he had to, maintain his health, or, to a certain extent, at least, to be able to, achieve his goal of finding the answer, right? So he can't, starve himself to death. So afterwards, he started kind of eating regular meals again. But when the 5 ascetic companions, right, when they saw this, they thought, wow, geez, Siddhartha, he's lost his will to continue, and he became greedy, right? So, yeah, eating, regular meager meals is become greedy. But anyways, to them it was. So they kind of abandoned him and went to this place called Deer Park in Sarnath to continue their practice, right? Their ascetic practice. Now, so then, Buddha was left on, or Siddhartha was left on his own to continue his his pursuit of becoming enlightened, right? So now, he, in rejecting the pleasure that the life of pleasure that he had earlier, and the indulgence of life in the palace, right? He was looking for the truth at the other extreme, right? Through the pain and self-mortification. Now, and then Siddhartha, he realized that the extreme, right? The extremes on one end, which is the pleasure, and then on the other end, which is the pain and self-mortification, right? Cannot overcome the suffering, right? Only the middle way can lead to the liberation from suffering. So, the thing is, people living in luxury and pleasure, right? They do not see life as suffering, right? So that's a delusion. That's I think most people fall into that category of they're living a life of delusion. They think that this pleasure that they're living is, they think it is pleasure, right? They don't think, then therefore they don't think life as suffering. We see that today. People who have a good life, they're wealthy, things like that. They have whatever they want. It's hard to talk to them about cultivation and about anything else, right? It's so focused on the material things that they can see and touch and, have and spend or whatever. On the other hand, the people who are in poverty and desperation, they're faced with much suffering, right? They're always suffering. Again, it's also difficult for them to think about anything else than trying to get, find a place to sleep and get the next meal, right? So So that's all suffering. I mean, the ones in the first category of uh, thinking that their life is full of pleasure, things like that. Yeah, that's a short-term view, right? So Buddha, so you can say he had great vision, right? He's not just looking at this life. Now, of course, he came from the Hindu tradition. They talk about reincarnation. So he knows about reincarnation. So he knows that there's going to be this endless cycle of birth, death, rebirth, right? So now today, of course, unfortunately, people don't necessarily believe that, right? Okay, so he vowed to meditate under the Bodhi tree. It was actually a sacred, a fig tree, okay, but is now known as the Bodhi tree, until he attained awakening or enlightenment, or that he died trying. Okay, so he resolved to do that. Now, during that process, you could say that there's this struggle. You can say demons in his mind. Okay, Mara, who's the ruler of the world of desires, right? That's the world we live in, came to break Siddhartha, right? To prevent him from achieving enlightenment. In the end, Mara said that he should be given, he threw, all his demons at him, try to attack him. I mean, this is all in his mind. And also, that didn't work. And he also sent, all these lovely, I guess Mara's daughters, whatever, try to seduce him, and that none of it. So basically, Buddha, his mind of concentration would not break, right? I mean, he was so focused, it would not arouse his mind, right? So remember, when we talk about practice, right? Don't give rise to any thoughts, right? Basically, don't have the mind be aroused, right? So when the mind is aroused, then that's when we can get into trouble, right? So his mind is completely still. So in the end, Mara said that, well, he should be given the seat of enlightenment, right? And his demons all attested to it as his witness, because Mara is a very powerful spiritual, demon, I guess. And then Mara then challenged Siddhartha, who will speak for you? Right? Who's gonna, right? And then Siddhartha reached out his right hand and touched the earth, and the earth itself was his witness. Okay, so thus Mara failed to break Siddhartha and disappeared. Right? In the morning, Siddhartha saw the shooting star, or maybe it was the morning star, and realized his goal of achieving enlightenment. So now, however, he hadn't really achieved complete enlightenment until the Buddha Dipankara, which is the previous Buddha, right, appeared to him and reminded him that he was still attached to the idea of attaining enlightenment. Okay, so there was still, again, so becoming enlightened, there has to be no attachments at all to anything. Okay, and so the Buddha, Siddhartha, when he let go of this final attachment, he became fully enlightened. Right, thus Gautama Buddha was certified by Dipankara Buddha. Right. Now, so he achieved full awakening and enlightenment is after 49 days, meditating under the Bodhi tree. During the course of his awakening and enlightenment, he achieved the 6 transcendental powers. Right, so these are every Buddha basically gets these powers when you get to that level. I mean, yeah. So when you're a Buddha, these powers are, they can say this is like special powers, like walking on water, walking through walls, or whatever, right? Also, there's the divine ear, which is clairaudience, I guess. Or there's also the mind penetrating, like telepathy. There's also like knowing the past lives and the future as well. Okay, so that's the divine eye. Okay, and also the 6th one, which is really what the Buddhas get, is the extinction of all mental intoxicants or afflictions. Right, there are no outflows, we say. Okay, so they will not be affected by anything. right? So therefore, they're always, once they're Buddha, they stay there. Okay. So other, you can say other enlightened people like arhats, right? They're at a lower level, right? So they don't have that last one. So there are certain things that they still don't get. But a lot of Buddha's disciples became arhats upon hearing his dharma, his teaching, right? Okay, so awake. Okay, just kind of mention this is kind of interesting because awake. This Chinese word, okay, means awake, aware, enlightenment. But the same character could also mean sleep, right? So but it's pronounced differently. In that case, it would be jiao. Okay, but so the interesting thing is, what's the difference between being asleep and being aware? Okay, we're not talking about consciousness. Okay, I mean at one level you can say consciousness, but so what was the difference? Between Siddhartha and when he became a Buddha, right? It was still the same person, right? He was asleep before. Asleep meaning, you could say asleep meaning, ignorance, right? And after he was awakened, and he realized the truth. Okay, so everything, the only difference is in his mind, right? It was in his mind. And you can say his perception, or I mean, this, I say in the past, like he flipped the switch in his mind. Okay, and so that's the only difference, right? There's no physical difference, but of course the physical difference comes from he has these powers now, these transcendental powers, but still it was all in the mind, right? The difference is in the mind. So that's kind of interesting that the Chinese use this same character for these two. So it's like flip side of the same coin, right? It's the same. So sentient beings, we are sentient beings until we become enlightened, or truly aware of our true nature. Then we're no longer a sentient being. We are. So this Buddha here, this Buddha character, Paul, right, is composed of two parts. The radical on the left, which is the person, a human, and this character on the right, full, means not. Okay, so it's not human. So you can say not a sentient being anymore. Buddha is not a sentient being, right? Buddha is an awakened or enlightened being, right? And they've transcended suffering. Okay, so this is kind of interesting side thing. All right. Okay, so he become the awakened one. Now, he achieved complete insight into the Four Noble Truths. Right, so this is really the key, foundation, fundamental, his I guess what he discovered or realized, that there is suffering, right? That suffering has a cause, has a beginning, and that suffering also has an end, right? So if there's anything that has a beginning has an end. So if there is a cause for something, it can also end, right? So that's a very key point, and that there is also this path that leads to the end of that suffering. Okay, so within this, you have the whole idea of causality and karma, right? So and Buddha then talks about that as well. And also and in more detail, the 12 links of dependent origination of how the cause happens, right? Okay, so Buddha wanted to, once he became enlightened, then he wanted to, because he wasn't doing this for himself, right? He always wanted to see how he can find the end of suffering and then teach others, or at least enable others to also find that or discover or realize that truth for themselves, right? So he first he wanted to go teach what he now understood or realized to those two masters who taught him the meditation, but unfortunately they had died already, so he couldn't teach them. But then he went to find those 5 ascetic companions, that had left him, right? So he went to Deer Park, and so those companions, Condinia was one of them, right? And then there were 4 others, right? So at first, when the Buddha approached them at Deer Park, they kind of ignored him, thinking that he had given up the search for the truth. But as the Buddha got closer, they noticed that he was different and looked very noble, right? He had this like glow or this light about him. So they greeted, excuse me, they greeted Buddha and offered him water and prepared a seat. So after sitting down, Buddha told them that he realized the truth of the end of suffering, right? Or you can say that's also nirvana, right? And the way to end it. So thus began his first sermon called the Dharmakakra Pravatana, right? Sutra. Okay, so that and it's is known as the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. Okay, so after hearing the first teaching, Kandinya attained the first stage of enlightenment and asked to be Buddha's disciple. Right, soon, the other 4 ascetics also were accepted as disciples, and thus the Sangha was established. Okay, and eventually, they all became enlightened from his teachings, because they were all very well cultivated already. I mean, Buddha, he was looking for those who could more easily accept his teachings, accept the teachings, and accept them and understand them. And so that's why you went to them first. And okay, so Kandinya became the first arhat after hearing Buddha's teachings. The others would also attain enlightenment as arhats. Afterwards, there were also many young men, from wealthy, a lot of them also from wealthy and high caste families, right? Back then in the Hindu tradition, they have a caste system, right? Different levels of social status. But a lot of the wealthy ones and high caste families, they heard the teachings and also joined the Sangha. So when the Buddha had about like 60 monks as his disciples, he told them to go out and start spreading the Dharma. Right? Most of not all of those disciples also became arhats. So to become an arhat it's not easy, because that means they have a full understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. Okay, and it's not like our understanding. Our understanding is very kind of like intellectual understanding. We don't have that deep insight into it as they did, and so it just goes to show that they were, they all had this very good deep foundation, and obviously, the Buddha, speaking to them. Who knows? If we were there, maybe we were. Some of us were maybe there as Buddha's disciples, and it's just being maybe in the presence of the Buddha, hearing the Buddha speak the Dharma is, that's powerful in itself. Okay. All right. All right. So what he sought was, what he found was this middle way, right? Which is basically the Noble Eightfold Path, right? Which is right view or understanding, right intention or thoughts, right speech, right action, conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So all these, if we have to, Buddha is saying that we have to do all of these, right, to achieve that end, to attain nirvana, achieve the end of suffering. Okay, so it is the path of living in awareness. This is from the Dhammakakka Pravatana Sutra, actually. So it is the path of living in awareness. Mindfulness is the foundation. By practicing mindfulness, you can develop concentration, which enables you to attain understanding. By way of right concentration, you realize right awareness, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, and effort. Okay. So, the understanding that develops can liberate us from every shackle of suffering and give birth to true peace and joy. All right. So, and then the Four Noble Truths, right? So the first truth, the existence of suffering, right? Birth, old age, sickness, and death are suffering, right? Sadness, anger, jealousy, worry, anxiety, fear, and despair are also suffering. Separation from loved ones is suffering. Association with those you hate is suffering, right? Desire, attachment, and clinging to the five skandhas, the aggregates, is suffering, right? Five skandhas being the forms, the sensations, the perceptions, the mental objects, I guess. Those are the things that, I mean, this is, remember, we talked about this before, it's how we view the world, right? We view the world through our senses, and it's this process called the five skandhas, and that's how it ends up, that creates our, it's a false worldview. I mean, if we accept it as being the truth, then that leads us to desires, well, it's basically ignorance, and desires, attachments, clinging, grasping, things like that, and that leads to more suffering. Okay. Then the origin suffering is the second one. So because of ignorance, people cannot see the truth about life, and they become caught in the flames of desire, anger, jealousy, grief, worry, fear, and despair. It is the craving that leads to becoming a rebirth, accompanied by enjoyment and lust, and enjoying this and that. In other words, craving for sensual desires, craving for becoming or being, craving for disbecoming or non-being. All right, so all these, so you can say that, yeah, so it hits both sides in terms of the wants and things that we avoid, right? We don't like, we like and don't like, right? So today we talk about, we don't want to be, there's that duality, right? That, we love and hate, right? We have to avoid that, okay? And you can say, the middle way, right? It's avoiding that duality, right? And then the third noble truth is that there's the cessation of suffering, right? It is the remainderless fading and ceasing, giving up, relinquishing, right? Letting go and rejecting of that same craving, right? So that's why we say to kind of reduce our desires or get rid of those desires, right? Because the desires then lead to the craving, attachments, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. And fourth noble truth then is there's this path leading to the cessation of suffering, right? It's simply the noble eightfold path. That's okay. So, and then we said that. All right. Okay. So, I just wanted to let's see here. Yeah, just mention a few stories here. A few stories. These are whether these are true stories or they are kind of like allegories, I guess, or parables. Either way, they kind of help present the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, so the first one, once Buddha, was sitting under a tree, a man came to him and started abusing him verbally. Right after abusing the Buddha, he stood there waiting for Buddha to react. But Buddha did not respond or react in the slightest. So the man became even more angry and insulted the Buddha some more. Still, the Buddha did not react. And then this went on for quite a long time. And after a while, finally, the man asked Buddha, I've been abusing you. Why aren't you angry at me? Buddha replied, because I have not accepted your abuse. Right? The man was confused and said, well, but you heard it all. You heard all my words. And the Buddha smiled and said, I do not need the abuse, so why would I hear it? All the abuse remains with you. And the man was even more confused. And the Buddha asked him, well, if you give someone coins and the person does not accept them, then where do the coins remain? Right? The man replied, they remain with me. Right? So the Buddha said, you are right. And this is the same with the abuse. When you insulted me, I did not accept any of it from you. Therefore, the abuse remains with you, and I have no reason to be angry with you. Then the man realized his mistake and apologized to the Buddha. Right? So this is, this is, you can say there's a moral to the story here that, we get angry because we accept what's being said to us or done to us, and well, accepting, of course, means it's affecting. I mean, it's affecting us, right? Because we have that ego, right? Now, obviously, the Buddha, he has no ego, right? There's no self. No, that self is gone, right? And so all those abuse, the insults, didn't affect the Buddha at all, right? Because there's no need. I mean, there's nothing. There's nothing there's nothing there basically for the Buddha, right? So the same thing. I mean, how we deal with things, we should not, especially not get emotional. Obviously, the emotions coming from means that we're reacting to it. Okay, so yeah, this is so this is a thing that we talk about. It's like don't get. We have to remain calm, at the very least, remain calm, and then we can avoid creating more problems. If we get angry and then it can start fighting, arguing back. I mean, it can get worse. Okay, so then that's how you create karma, right? So the same thing that what Jesus is saying, turn the other cheek or just whatever, forgive and forget, right? But this is you can say this is even higher level. It's like it's like person not even insulting you. Okay, right? Okay, so another let's see, another story. Once, okay, there was this man who was a well-known criminal. Okay, so he's a sinner. One day he goes aside to meet the Buddha. He wanted to be initiated, right, become a disciple, but he was afraid that people might not allow him to enter, to go see the Buddha because he's well known as a criminal, right? So he decided to kind of go when there were not too many people, and he kind of jumped the fence from the back, jumped the wall from the back side. Right now, unfortunately, the Buddha was not there, right, at the time. He went out begging, and he was caught by Buddha's disciples. And the man said, "Well, I didn't come to steal anything. I am well known around here, hated and feared by most around here. I was just afraid that you wouldn't allow me through the main gate. That's why I came from the back. You might not believe me, but I want to become basically a follower, a disciple of the Buddha." So the disciples caught him, right? They took him to Sariputra, who's one of Buddha's main disciples, right? And Sariputra, he can, read. He can also see the people's past lives. So they asked, Sariputra to look into this person's past lives and see if, well, he's a murderer now, but maybe he was, a good person in a past life, right? So, so in other words, maybe he has some merit from past lives. Now, so Sariputra looked into his past thousands of lives, but he always saw the same, that this guy, he's a dangerous person, man. It's like for thousands of lives, he's always been a bad person, a sinner, right? Yeah, so it's like he's thinking, yeah, it's impossible. I mean, how can this man change? And he's always been bad, and he probably always will be. So he said, even the Buddha can't do anything about this. Right. So saying this, right? So then Sariputra told his disciples to take them out, take this person outside, kick him out. Now, so the man, he was sent outside. He felt bad, and thought that there was no chance for him to change. So, alive. So he couldn't be around the Buddha. Thinking this, he wanted to commit suicide. Right. So just around the main gate corner, he started to bang his head against the wall. He wanted to kill himself. Just then, the Buddha returned from begging, and seeing the man, he stopped him and took him inside. After a few days, the man was initiated and became a disciple of the Buddha. Now, his disciples were kind of confused. So Sariputra went to Buddha and said, "Well, this man, he has lived thousands of lives of misery and has been a sinner. How can this man become initiated in only a few days?" Right? if this man can be enlightened in a few days, then what's the point of looking into people's past lives? Right? The Buddha replied, well, you looked into his past, but didn't look into his future. Right? Any moment the person decides to change, he can change. That very decision is decisive. Right? This man has lived thousands of lives of misery, but now he hankers for change, and his intensity to change is infinite. Hence, in a few days, he was able to become a disciple. So this is saying that, yeah, I mean, the past, yes, the past is important in terms of our karma, right? But we have to have that will to change, you know, to do the right thing, to do good. And if it's strong enough, we can make that change. Okay, so we shouldn't be stuck on, you can say, you know, the idea that, oh, past, I can't change the past, but I can change the present, I can change the future. Okay, so now, and then next, okay, so this, all right, so once the Buddha was visiting a small village, right, there people got to know about this, his visit, and started to come to him about their problems. So one day, some people brought this blind man to him and said, well, this guy's blind, and we're his closest friends. You know, we told him about light, but he's not ready to accept the fact that there is light, right? So, because the blind man, you know, he's never seen light, right? So his argument such that we are at a loss, right? Even though, you know, we know that there is light, you know, they couldn't convince him that there was light, right? So they asked the Buddha, he can convince, you know, kind of convince the guy, the blind man, that there is light. You know, the blind man says, you know, if I can't touch it, then, well, I have ears, I can, you know, so does light have a sound? Can I hear it? You know, if I can't hear it, then maybe I can taste it. Or does it have a smell for me to smell? Right. So he's trying to use his other senses to see if there's, you know, to try to see that there's evidence of light. Right. So there's no way to convince him. Right. The light can only be seen with the eyes, and he has no eyes. Right. So he complained. He complains that the village people are not necessarily talking about light just to prove that he was blind. Right. He felt that you know, they invented this story of light just to prove that he was blind. Okay, so anyway, so Buddha said, no, I am not going to try to convince him, right? Mankind's problems have been created by people who try to explain things to those who cannot see. I won't make that mistake. I will not explain to a blind man that there is light. You have brought him to the wrong person. Right? But the friends insisted to Buddha, and Buddha says, all right, there's no need to bring him to me. Take him to a doctor instead, who can possibly treat his eyes. Right? He does not need preaching, he needs treatment. Right? This is not a question of exclamations or of him believing things that you tell. If his eyes get cured, there will be no need for you to explain. Right? He himself will be able to see and know the light. So his friends kind of understood what Buddha was saying and took him to a doctor for treatment. Now, fortunately, he was able to see after, you know, a few months. By that time, the Buddha already left the village. The blind man followed him and bowed to the Buddha and said, I was wrong. There is light. I couldn't see before. Therefore, I didn't believe anything about light. And Buddha answered, yes, you're certainly wrong, but your eyes got cured because you refused to accept or believe what others told you. Unless you experience it yourself, right? If you had accepted what your friends had told you, then the matter would have ended there, and there would be no question of treatment for your eyes, right? So, you know, you can say that the point here is that we have to search on our own for to get that understanding. We can't just believe something or not believe something that someone says, right? If we don't seek that ourselves, right, we will not gain it. We will not attain that understanding or the realization. Okay, so basically we have to search within, right? Okay, let's see, another one. This will be the last one here. All right, so once there was a great philosopher who came to Buddha, right? He had a lot of questions to ask. Right? He came to the Buddha and started asking questions to him. And Buddha listened and said, do you really want an answer? Right? If you really want it, can you pay the price? The philosopher replied, my whole life I have been searching for answers. I received many answers, but from every answer I got, new questions were raised. All right, so what price do you ask? I'm ready to pay the full price. I just want answers to these questions and want to leave this earth with those questions answered. All right, the Buddha said, good, okay, so most people want answers but are not willing to pay the price. That's what I asked you. So to sit in silence for 2 years, that's the price. All right, sit near me in silence for 2 years, and when those 2 years pass, I myself will tell you to ask the questions. Right? At that time, you can ask whatever you want and you want answers for. I promise that I will answer everything. I will dispel all doubts. But for 2 years, sitting there, you have to sit there completely still and silent, and don't bring it up. The questions for 2 years. Right? The philosopher is thinking, oh, that's kind of a long time, 2 years. Will he even give me the answers then? Right? So he asked the Buddha, do you give full assurance that you will answer my every question after 2 years? Buddha replied, I give complete assurance. If you ask, then I will definitely answer. But if you do not ask, who will I answer? Right? Just at that time, a disciple who was sitting in meditation under a tree nearby began to laugh. The philosopher asked Buddha, now why is he laughing? Ask him, Buddha says. So the philosopher went to the disciple and asked him. And the disciple replied, if you want to ask something, ask now. I was deceived in the same way. He made a fool of me too. But I can tell you, he is telling the truth. If you ask after 2 years, he will definitely answer. But who asks after 2 years? I have sat here silently for 2 years and not, let's see, and goes on, he doesn't go on prodding me, asking, saying to ask, okay? So after remaining silent for 2 years, nothing remains to be asked. Every answer is received, right? If you want to ask now. Otherwise, after 2 years, nothing will be left to ask. Right? So the philosopher wanted to know the answers. So he stayed there with Buddha. He would sit there silently every day. He had forgotten the track of time because one whose thoughts have become slow, they lose awareness of time. But Buddha remembered the exact time. 2 years were over. Buddha went to the philosopher and said, now you can ask any question. I'll answer each and everything as I promised. Do you have something to ask? The philosopher started laughing and said, that disciple's right. Now, when I have been sitting here for 2 years, I have nothing left to ask. Through your grace, all answer has come. So basically, yeah, this is, I don't know if this one's true, but it's basically, answers are not given, but you can say they're received. Okay, the answer comes from within, for the most part, right? I mean, if the Buddha, yeah, in terms of like enlightenment, okay, I mean, Buddha, he can't really tell us exactly, what it's like, because we have to experience it ourselves. And so a lot of these, questions we have, we can kind of answer for ourselves, right? Because a lot of times we seek external answers and we get an answer, but it's not the same as if we realize that answer ourselves, right? We don't have that same understanding and realization. Okay, well, anyways, all right, enough of the stories. All right, so conclusion. All right, so we should be inspired by Buddha's life and learn from his teachings, right? As a child, the Buddha was already compassionate and merciful, right? So we should be inspired by his compassion for all living beings, right? We should also be inspired by his determination in seeking the truth. Okay, so he was willing to die, to get that truth, right? And we have it, given to us and we're still not willing to cultivate or to learn more and to practice and cultivate, that seems like we aren't. I mean, if we aren't willing to do that, then we have to ask ourselves, am I really worthy of getting the truth? Okay. And we have to understand the Four Noble Truths, right? It's about the human condition, that suffering, there's existence suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path. There's a path that leads to the cessation of suffering, right? So the inspiration and teaching of the Buddha gives us really ultimate self-empowerment, right? The Buddha isn't really, he wants us to become self-empowered, to be able to become enlightened ourselves, right? The Buddha cannot give us enlightenment, and no one can do that, right? So we have to become enlightened ourselves. And his teachings basically gives us that ability, that empowerment, empowers us to become enlightened. Because we have it, within ourselves to become enlightened, right? Because that comes from within, right? So he showed us and taught us how to become enlightened. Today we have received the Tao blessing, which is a big step toward the path of enlightenment and transcending the cycle of death and rebirth. But as Buddha taught us, we must walk the path ourselves by learning, cultivating, and practicing to achieve it. Okay, so this is just kind of obviously this is not a complete overview of Buddha's life and his teachings, but it's kind of talk a little bit about it because, again, as you can say, it was topical because his birthday is celebrated on Sunday. So, anyways, if I had said anything wrong, I asked Buddhists for forgiveness and also asked the Transcendental Master lectures for their corrections. And finally, I also want to ask the Holy Teacher to dedicate the merits from this class to all the sentient beings who are suffering in the world, so that hopefully the sooner that they can be relieved of suffering and to find the truth themselves. All right. Thank you.